Thank you very much. Welcome to our audience. Welcome to our guests who have taken the time during this very difficult time to speak to us today. It's very much appreciated. But we have little time, so let me jump in right away. If I can start out with you, Minister Sikorski. From your perspective, how did we get here? Did we just collectively miscalculate something?
I think many people did because they didn't expect for President Putin to cross the line of foreign aggression. I have to say I wasn't surprised, but shocked, of course. And the sight of the leader of a major country like Russia, member of the UN Security Council, nuclear state, shamelessly lying and shamelessly starting a war in Europe, I think has been a shock to many people, and quite right, and high time. This justification for the war, that he is trying to remove a Nazi regime in Kiev, whereas actually the president of Ukraine is a democratically elected politician from a Jewish background. And if anybody is a tyrant who does not have democratic legitimacy, and using a fascistic language of conquest, domination, a cult of power, it's President Putin himself. I can't recall a conflict where the line between right and wrong, the aggressors and the victims of aggression has been drawn so clearly, so decisively. Some things are a silver lining, namely the fact that the US led the world in warning and actually also trying to deter President Putin from launching this war. The heroism of the Ukrainian president and entire society, and unprecedented unity of the West. If you'd asked me 2 weeks ago whether we would do the kinds of things that we are now doing, I would have doubted it. But we are. We have imposed unprecedented sanctions. We are helping the Ukrainians. We are helping the refugees. Things are not going Putin's way. He was expecting this to be a short, sharp, surgical operation that would shore up his support at home and include Ukraine in his scheme to rebuild the Russian Empire. It's not going that way. And if this goes any, if he gets bogged down further, I think his own regime will be in trouble. Now we can discuss about the details of the operations of the diplomatic front, but I just have to tell you that whereas I feared that this would happen, I am now somewhat optimistic that the Ukrainians have a chance of at least defending their independence. I'm not sure about all of the territory, but one thing, and let that be my last thought, is irreversible. Putin will not be able to turn these Ukrainians into Russians, and Ukraine has forever brandished its identity and credentials as a freedom-loving country, and a country that is willing to make sacrifices for the sake of becoming a European democracy. That's not nothing. That's worth the fight.
Thank you. That gives us a good introduction. Actually, speaking about the Ukrainians themselves, Vladislav, if I can turn to you, you're actually on the ground in Ukraine, have been so even before the war was started by Russia against Ukraine. As we're speaking, Russian warships are outside of your beloved city of Odessa. Would you mind describing the situation to us in Odessa, but generally in Ukraine? And what is the state of mind, as you understand it, of Ukrainians right now?
Thank you for having me. It's absolutely a remarkable time, horrific, but also in many ways wonderful in terms of watching the social cohesion, watching the way that the Ukrainian people have come together and put aside their Byzantine differences. Sorry for the quote. The joke. The Ukrainians have this horrible but wonderful character trait. They set aside their differences in a time of war, but they also are continuously at each other's throats, very much competitive. But they've set aside all differences. They've set aside all political partisan differences, all the different oligarch Ukrainian-owned TV shows, television stations, all 6 or 7 of them, stopped competing with each other, and they now collaborate on a single feed. Everyone in this country watches the same television show all day long. All the Ukrainian television stations play the same program, a marathon that they all cooperate on. Imagine if CNN, CBS, BBC, MSNBC, and Fox News all stopped in the middle of a war, having their own alternate realities, and all cooperated on producing one countrywide feed that everyone was watching. There are no politicians sniping at President Zelensky, who, according to all polling, has like 94, 93% approval ratings. He's probably the most powerful and the most popular politician in the entire world. He's a 5,000-ton behemoth. He's a political colossus. He's 50 meters tall. He is rallying the country. He's the secret sauce for the reason that they've resisted as well as they have. So that's the social aspect of it. Militarily, they've done very well in Kiev. They've held on in Kharkiv. They fought very hard around Sumy, especially in Kharkiv. They fought very hard. Kherson, they fought harder than they should have, and they took the city back for half a day before they had to vacate it. Outside of the airports, the aerodromes outside of Kiev that the Russians needed to take in order to land airborne troops, they've not been able to take any of those airports. All the major airports are still under the control of the Ukrainian army, or in the case of the Antonov airport in Gostomel, it is so badly destroyed that nothing will fly there for a very long time. There's only the runways littered with Ukrainian and Russian vehicles. It's completely unusable. In the south, the Ukrainians have retreated. The 28th has retreated from Kherson to defend Mykolaiv, so that they can defend my native Odessa. Mariupol is getting pounded. It's going to fall, but it's going to be really brutal. And Melitopol has already probably fallen, though that's not been confirmed yet by the Ukrainians. So good things are the Belarusian army has not come in. I vacated the place on the Belarusian border, which I was reporting from when British intelligence and the Americans called me 3 days ago saying, you need to get out of the sector of the Belarus border. The tanks are rolling in. They've not yet rolled in. The Ukrainian Air Force is still airborne, and it's day 8, which is total catastrophe from the standpoint of Russian competence. They've not turned off the internet or heating or electricity almost anywhere except Mariupol. I'm still online with you, and people in Kiev are still on the line. They've lost the propaganda war. They've lost the information war, and the Ukrainians are 3/4 of them thinking that they will survive. As the minister said, probably will have less territory unless there's a total withdrawal. But the Ukrainian state has held up as well as could be expected under the situation, and the Russian advance has been shambolic. That's why they're bombing civilians now.
Thank you, Vlad. Now, Matt, there has been, as Minister Sikorski mentioned, an incredible European response, incredible unity, as could probably not have been expected before that, between member states, but also between the cooperation between EU and NATO states with the United States in facing Russia today. There has been some dissent. Hungary was among the last members to okay banning Russia from SWIFT, and it still opposes not only sending weapons to Ukraine. Poland is now very active in advocating for Ukraine, but over the last couple of years, its policy vis-a-vis Kiev was not extremely constructive. Germany had originally opposed SWIFT and sending weapons and has now entirely changed course. From your perspective, is this a real change? And do you think it will last?
I think in terms of the EU, it definitely will last. I expect that we will see a little bit more debate in some countries if this conflict continues for some time about what to do, about whether, for example, sending weapons is the right thing, because there are a lot of sort of pacifist elements in Europe, as we know, and you're already seeing some second guessing in Germany from the left of the SPD even. So I think that there will be debates, but I think at the end of the day that the shift that we've seen, this embrace of Ukraine, is just going to continue, because as Minister Sikorski said before, it's rare in our lifetimes to have seen a conflict where right and wrong is just so clear. It does remind one a bit of the situation in the Balkans in the 1990s. But I think it's very difficult for Russia to, and Putin in particular, to use his propaganda here in a way that's going to be effective. And if you look at the justification for the war, for example, this idea of genocide, there's a genocide going on there. When I heard that, I immediately thought he was trying to harken back to the 1990s, to the justification that NATO used for bombing the former Yugoslavia at that time by saying there was genocide happening in Kosovo. And this is something obviously that Russia opposed at the time and has brought up again and again ever since. So I think he was hoping to sort of rub the West's nose in it, as it were, on that point. But as you mentioned, even countries like Hungary, which have been pretty cozy with Putin over the years, are now getting into line. And I think, Orban has not really opposed sending arms there. He's just said that he doesn't want Hungary to be a transit country, which is for him as well as for the Germans. This is a major about face if you look at where he was just a few weeks ago.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. Minister Sikorski, sort of staying on that point, in particular on what has been done by the European Union, what can still be done. What do you think could still be done? What has not yet been done and what should be done? And what do you think will be the impact of the European on the European Union? Will it automatically transform the European Union much more into a political, military, cohesive project, or will it be just the same?
What we've just witnessed is a revolution in the geopolitical attitudes, primarily of Germany and of the European Union. And let us ponder for a while how drastic the sanctions are. Putin thought he had a war chest of $630 billion. He had these foreign reserves, but nobody explained to him that these days foreign reserves are not physical bonds that you can trade even at a discount. That they are just entries in the databases of the central banks that issue that particular currency. And these databases have been closed to him. So he's left with only about $120 billion worth of physical gold, which is very cumbersome. So if he wants to buy some supplies, say from China, he needs to deliver that gold to the border. The Russian economy is in the process of being shut down. It all worked for Putin while he was a parasite on the Western system, and while we didn't believe his words that he regarded us as the enemy. Well, he has now convinced us, and there are these consequences which will be extremely painful for him. They will come in much faster than I thought. I thought the sanctions would work in a matter of months. They're going to work in a matter of days and weeks. the EU will now be a more strategic geopolitical entity. I think we will see a new seriousness in building up European defense. I've been trying to persuade the Germans to put themselves at the head of creating a gas union. You know, the European Union started as a coal and steel community. We are also a uranium union. The Commission buys uranium on behalf of member states. If we did that with gas, we would then be dictating the price of that gas and the conditions of delivery, rather than member states competing for Putin's favor. That would change the paradigm. And we are going to have rearmament. Poland has already announced 3% of GDP. Germany has announced 2% of GDP. But again, we need to put this rearmament in a European context so that, for example, a rearmed Germany, it doesn't raise the traditional fears of its part. So I think you're going to see Mr. Putin as the father of a new projects, new forms of European unity and European cohesion.
Matt, I was wondering whether you would want to respond to that, in particular on the possibility of a sort of independent gas union, and in particular what kind of role Germany would play in that.
Well, I think these are the types of ideas clearly that the Europeans need to start thinking about right now. And if you look at Germany in particular, it doesn't even have a single LNG terminal to receive liquid natural gas, which is a big problem in the longer term. There are a couple of dozen of those around Europe. But if you cut off the supply from Russia, which is over half of Germany's gas supply at the moment, it's half of total exports of total imports of gas. So that is quite a lot of gas that Germany is getting from Russia. In other countries like Austria, I think it's 80% of their total usage. So there are other things happening in the coming years. The Dutch are going to stop gas exploration because of problems they have there with earthquakes. They're also a big supplier for Germany. So this gas question is going to remain on the table clearly. I think, though, that the larger question is whether the political unity within Europe is going to be there on this defense question. Because, in the past, whenever you've seen suggestions like this, the whole debate around strategic autonomy, there has been a divide, and there are plenty of countries, I think Poland would be one of them, that would prefer for the United States to remain in a sort of leading role when it comes to European security. And I think that's also true of the Baltics. So this sea change that we've seen with Germany is certainly notable, but I think that, we really need to digest it and look closely at it, because, this party, the Social Democrats, just a couple of weeks ago, they were vowing basically not to do this. And during the election campaign, they were sort of, making no secret of the fact that they really didn't want to fulfill the 2% commitment. And now they've done a 180-degree turn. And I hope that they stick to that. But I think it's also worth remembering that, Germany has contributed to this problem that we're in, that Ukraine is in right now. And I think you can make a pretty strong argument that they have made the crisis much worse and have actually helped Putin over the years drive a wedge into Europe on these questions, including the question of gas and including the question of Russia and people's positioning towards Russia, especially in Germany, because at the end of the day, the whole debate around Nord Stream 2 in Germany really became a proxy for people's views about Russia and whether they wanted to have, friendlier, more cooperative relations with Russia or not. And clearly many do. As recently as last month, 2/3 of Germans were still saying that they wanted Nord Stream 2 to go into operation. That was in late January. So, this is quite a shift. And I think the dust has to settle really before we will really know what this is going to mean in the long term.
Thank you, Matt. Let me now turn to Russia itself. Putin has more or less shut down all media and opposition in Russia. Is there still hope that the Russian people can rise against Putin and this war? And maybe I'll start with you, Vlad.
Look, there's tremendous dissatisfaction amongst Russian elites. By the way, I'm related to some of them. I'm both part of the Russian and the Ukrainian diaspora, and I inherited a Russian passport from my father, which I intend to burn as soon as I get back to my wife in Paris in front of the Russian embassy. If you want to come with a camera, we can do that. I intend to give up my Russian citizenship, and there are lots of other people like me in the diaspora who are going to give up their Russian citizenship. I'm never going to, and by the way, I'm going to keep speaking to my Ukrainian wife in Russian and to some degree in French at home. This has nothing to do with Russian language or Russian culture, but the Russian state, as it is under Putin, has debased itself. And I think swathes of the Russian population, even people who are not particularly liberal or particularly democratically oriented, understand that. Watching these blocks of Soviet apartment buildings, which are the same in every city in Russia and Belarus and Ukraine, they're cookie cutter, watching them get blown up by Russian artillery. Every single person who lives in the same sort of building in Voronezh or Rostov or 100 other cities that I can name them, they all can imagine very easily their own apartment getting blown up for no reason. So there are tremendous numbers of ordinary people who don't like this. There are tremendous numbers of people in the diaspora from London to Germany, to San Francisco, to New York, who are livid at this. This will have tremendous consequences for all sorts of things that we can't even begin to imagine. I do believe that this is the beginning of the end for the Russian regime. We have rumors now of a vote for martial law. Certainly, there are not going to be any more flights out into Europe or Canada or America. The Russians, if they are not going to be made into North Korea by themselves, are going to be made into North Korea by us. And I do believe that sooner rather than later, what's going to happen is a coup d'etat by the Siloviki, the so-called security guys around Putin. It's only in 1917 that you've had transition of power in Russia through the people below. Transitions usually happen at the elite level and at the palace coup level. Certainly, if you're an oligarch and an intelligence guy, security guy around him, and you see what's happening to the Russian economy and to your own standing in the world and your own children's future, now is the time to lock them in a room and take command of Russian command and control.
Thank you, Vlad. Minister, I was wondering whether you share that view, and also if I could maybe then ask a follow-up question. Basically, over the past decade, Russia has been increasing its influence in the European Union by hiring former heads of states. One of them is still standing. Chancellor Schröder has refused to step down from his roles by using propaganda with, RT, Sputnik, that they have now been shut down, by cyber hacking, financing of populist parties on the far left and on the far right, fake environmental projects, and the list goes on. Do you think the European Union, the European national states have finally woken up to that reality, which, by the way, is not only Russian, because we also have influence from other countries, from whether it's in different ways and shapes and forms, of course, but whether it's Qatar or Turkey. Do you think that the Europeans are finally ready to sort of establish some sort of, European sovereignty?
Well, I think Putin was getting away with a lot because he was under the threshold of angering people, of crossing some taboos in Europe. And one taboo in Europe is you don't change borders by force on the pretext of of protecting your national minorities. That's what happened in the annexation of Crimea and Donbass. And but you know, Crimea was bloodless, so he got away with it, and Donbass was slightly more complicated. But this is crossing with tanks an international border, and that brings back the specter of world wars, which, of course, in Europe were catastrophes. So Putin has managed to scare everyone, and that's why you have the reaction that you do. And we will, I hope, now systematically undo his networks, his propaganda networks, his intelligence networks, his financial networks, and so on, both in Europe and the United States. You know, if Twitter can cut off a lying US president, well, why can't they cut off a lying Russian president? This needs to be done because Putin has been at war with us for a long time, as you say, but we didn't believe, many people in the West didn't believe it. Well, now they do. And I agree that this could bring Putin down. There are various scenarios under which tyrants fall. One interesting one is, remember, in India, when Indira Gandhi ordered the storming of the Sikh temple in Amritsar, she was shot by one of her Sikh bodyguards. And I wouldn't exclude a bodyguard with a Ukrainian aunt, you know, in Mariupol. But yes, Russia traditionally reforms itself only as a result of an unsuccessful war, be it the Crimean War, be it the Russo-Japanese War, and so on. And this war is not going well. If that 60-mile or whatever it is, traffic jam in front of Kiev gets annihilated, and it's a sitting duck, I think Putin will be in serious trouble. The other scenario, a much scarier one, is that he's already threatening to raise the alert of his nuclear forces. Let's remember that under the Zapad exercises, the Russian army has for years trained the use of tactical nuclear weapons to explode them in the air, not necessarily harming anybody, but to stun everybody into accepting Russia's political aims. And if he gives such an order, I'm not sure it will be fulfilled. I hope that would be a signal that he's got unmoored from reality and needs to be removed.
Matt, I don't know if you want to reply also in terms of what you think might be the possible scenarios. But other than that, I wanted to also ask you about the consequences on Europe with relations to refugees. We have now, I think, a little bit over 1 million refugees who have already left Ukraine. Many have come into Poland. I think in Germany, in Berlin in particular, there are also, and then of course the bordering countries, Romania, Moldavia. How do you think Europe is going to handle that refugee situation, and what will it do to the political stability of the European continent? And again, if you want to reply to the scenarios, don't hesitate.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to the scenarios. I think that anything could happen at this stage, and as Vlad and the minister said, I don't think Putin expected to be where he is now. I think that's the only thing we can say for sure, is that this is not going the way that he anticipated, and that whatever happens next, even if the Russians manage to take part of the country or take the whole country for a while, there's going to be very strong resistance probably for years to come. So it doesn't seem like this is going to end well for him. The question is, when that's going to be. In terms of the refugees, it sounds like we're just seeing the beginning of really historic movement of refugees out of the country. It's a real tragedy, clearly, for those people, for the families. I saw some images today of fathers putting their families on trains in Kiev. It's just sort of unimaginable, obviously, in this day and age. But I think that there is a willingness on the part of other European countries to take these refugees in, and a lot of people have looked at this and compared it to the question, the flow of refugees from Syria and so forth, and have wondered, well, why is this different? And I think the real reason is that this is the neighboring country, and these are people who are quite close, who come from the same sort of cultural background. So it does feel a bit different to many Europeans, I think, than the situation in the Middle East. Whether that's ethical or not is a different question. But I don't think on the political level it will necessarily be a problem anytime soon. The Ukrainians are also very well educated overall, so these are people who I think will be easily integrated into many European countries where there is, to be honest, already a shortage of skilled workers. So I don't think this is going to be the kind of political crisis that we saw in 2015, for example.
Thank you, Matt. And I'll ask my last question, because I know that the audience will want to ask as well. I know that we have a lot of people online. Vlad, the last question is for you, and it's about the Jewish community. Someone in our audience might not know, but the Jewish community in Ukraine is amongst the largest, actually, in Europe. Many Ukrainian Jews have started to flee, also to neighboring countries. Others have decided to stay. Could you tell us a little bit more about the situation for Ukrainian Jews right now in Ukraine? If you know about the state of affairs, and I think also, from what I understand, you're trying to get your own family out as well.
Yeah. Well, let's start with me. I mean, it's just a good indicator. Half my family in Odessa are Jews. The other half are so assimilated that they don't admit that they're Jews, and some are married into that family. It doesn't matter. They're my relatives, and I'm going to get all of them out. My father-in-law does not want to leave. It's a tragic situation. I've been on the phone calling. I've just been getting phone calls from Jewish emigres in America, in Los Angeles, in New York, people from Odessa who are now very well established in the professions, in banking, in show business, in politics. They've been giving me calls. They're saying the situation is going to be very bad, and I do think that my beloved Odessa, that which I lived and love and wrote a book about, is going to get bombed to hell unless something happens in the next three days, or the Ukrainian army does better outside of Nikolaev and outside of Kiev than we expected, unless the Russians sue for peace, which they very may well. They're going to just annihilate Odessa, and they're going to try to take it. The mayor of Odessa, who's this mobbed up guy named Tukhanov, has had a deal with Putin, but that deal is now off since he was making comments this morning. I think about half the Jews in Odessa will have to leave. The Jewish community of Donetsk is a tragic situation because they had to leave Donetsk in 2014, and one of my last meetings with anyone right before the war started was at 7:00 on right before the war began on was it Wednesday at 4 and 5 in the morning. I was having coffee with a political analyst and a public relations guy, a political consultant guy. And he was a Jew from Donetsk who had to flee in 2014. He said, "I am the fourth." He said, "When I take my boy out of Kiev tomorrow morning to my apartment in Lviv, to my friend's apartment in Lviv, I will be the fourth generation of Jews in my family. That my boy will be the fourth generation of Jews in my family who is in this country having to flee the city he was born in because of historical events." So my grandparents had to flee Kiev because of the Holocaust. My parents had to go to Israel, and we came back to Donetsk. I fled Donetsk in 2014. Since then, I've had a kid. That boy is going to be taken to Lviv tomorrow. So there are a lot of those stories. Ukrainian Jews are Ukrainians, after all, like everybody else. The ones who are living in safe communities are safe. I'm in Chernowitz now. The Jewish community here is tiny, but it is secure. The Jewish community in Dnipro is not secure. It's 70,000 strong. My people in Odessa are certainly not secure. And as soon as I get off of this thing that we're doing now, which is great and very important and really educational, even for me, I'd like to think I know a little bit, I'm going to be calling my relatives and trying to get them out, especially ones who are of military age. If whoever I have to bribe in order to get my the males in my family who are of military age, because men of military conscript age are not allowed past the Ukrainian border checkpoint, or whoever my people in LA or New York or San Francisco are going to bribe, I don't care. I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get my family out. And there's a lot of people like me.
Thank you, Vlad. Thank you to the three of you. I know that there are questions, so I'll pass it on to Daniel now.
Thank you, Simone. And Vlad, I'll send this first question to you, just staying on the topic of the Jewish community and Jews. We have a question from Ron Campias and JTA's Washington, D.C. bureau chief, who's asking, how do you explain President Zelensky's recent emphasis on his being Jewish in terms of his appeals to the international community, considering that he has not been outspoken about his Jewish identity in the past? Do you think these appeals will resonate in Israel, where Israelis have shown reluctance to too deeply involve themselves in the conflict?
Look, I had dinner with President Zelensky once, and I discussed his Jewish identity. That was the day before he became president. I've only met him one-on-one once. I had a 3-hour dinner with him. And he was not, not to discuss things that were private, but he wasn't particularly into his Jewish identity. He has no Jewish culture or education or background. For him, it is probably a deeply complex thing that he has thought about, and he sees as a liability in his life internally, probably. Being from, not from Dnipro or Kharkiv or Odessa, which are Jewish towns, but from Kryvyi Rih, where growing up in the 90s, probably being a very slim and slight Jewish kid who was a bodybuilder and an aspiring comedian, probably wasn't very comfortable. And I think those experiences are where he gets his internal strength now to rally the country as our Churchill. I told a British publication that it's amazing that we voted for a combination of Benny Hill and Boris Johnson, and we somehow got Churchill.
The British got Hill.
Yeah, that's right. So it's obvious that the only connection that he has to Jewish matters is in terms of a Holocaust. Both he has a lot of family that died in the Holocaust. That to him is the one thing where he actually feels like a Jew, I think. I probably think he's also Christian. Well, it's none of my business. It doesn't matter. He's of Jewish descent. He looks like an Ashkenazi Jewish boy. He's a pretty boy actor, but he has a very particular type. There are Ashkenazi Jews who blend in, or they maybe have Slavic blood and they blend in. He does not. He looks like a very particular type, and it's always obvious that he's a Jewish boy. And it's always been part of his routines, and it's always been laced through in a kind of jocular and clever way into his routines, kind of thing that he joked about but didn't deny and didn't really lean into. Now, I think he has leaned into it, and I wrote a piece for a Jewish magazine, Israeli magazine called Mishpacha, about him, which just came out yesterday. And I'm writing something for Tablet for tomorrow. I do believe that the fact that the leadership of his country in this time of war is heavily Jewish. And by the way, Reznikov, the defense minister, is also a member of the tribe, as is the head of a presidential administration, Yermak, as far as I know. His father's a Jew. The fact that all these people from a Russian-speaking town, including a highly placed person in the presidential administration by the name of Shafir, an important aide, the fact that they're all Jews or have Jewish fathers or have Jewish roots, it is not a coincidence, comrades, as they used to say. This is an indicator of the fact that this civic nationalism is about all Ukrainians. And this is not a Petlura Khmelnytsky kind of uprising of slaves which is, a good thing, but it only goes so far. It's no accident that the fascist rhetoric of Putin is denazification, which is as close as he can come to saying cleansing, against a liberal, democratic, vibrant, multicultural democracy whose armed forces are commanded by a Jew and whose defense minister is a Jew. It's no accident. The fact that there are all these Jews in administration is an indicator of the kind of liberal democratic project that they want to build, and their rejection of the Russian model of politics, which is basically one of autocracy and centralization. So I don't think he knows anything about the Torah or Mishnah, or I don't think he can read a Siddur. I don't think I don't think he has any Jewish education. I don't think he knows even the basic letters of the Hebrew alphabet, but that's not the point. I think he understands very deeply that a civic, liberal, democratic nationalism here has to be led by a guy like him, and that he is not an ethnic Ukrainian only makes it all the more stunning that this project has the entire population cohering behind it.
Thank you. Minister, I'll address the next question to you. It's from Stuart Fishbein in New York. Yesterday, you tweeted that the EU should use soft power as a possible path to peace. Can you speak about this more and what you proposed to Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission?
Sure. I was actually inspired what the Ukrainians are doing, which is offering some small stipend to defecting Russian soldiers. And of course, we are the richest economy on earth as the European Union, and we can afford to be much more generous. So I propose that we give 3,000 euros plus a 3-year work permit to every Russian soldier who defects, and a big bonus if they bring with them their tank, helicopter, or their commander-in-chief. And I really mean it. If we did that, plus, give refugee status to their families if need be, many of those Russian guys would be encouraged to defect, because many of them don't want to fight, don't want to be there, were drafted at the last minute, and would rather be somewhere else.
Matt, from Aaron Kobal in Washington, D.C., sanctions always hit ordinary people the hardest. People now can't access money from banks. Commercial airspace is closed. There's nowhere to go. Salaries have been devalued dramatically because the ruble's tumbling. Is it realistic to expect the Russian people to rise up and revolt against Putin?
I don't think it's unrealistic, but I think you also have to remember that he has the country on a pretty tight leash there. And, if you look at some of these protests that we've seen just in recent days and weeks, they're willing to go to great lengths here. I mean, there were pictures of a Russian babushka, as they say, being arrested for protesting against the possibility of a nuclear war. And she immediately had two sort of, policemen in riot gear surrounding her, carting her off. So, Russia obviously has a long history of this kind of oppression, and so I'm not convinced that this is something that would bear fruit in terms of some kind of an uprising in the short term. And, as I understand, Putin is supposed to be giving an address to the nation sometime later today. And we've seen a kind of mad dash for the borders now by Russians. All the flights are sold out, and people trying to go through the Baltics and so forth, because they're worried that martial law could be instituted pretty quickly here. So I think despite the sanctions, which are very serious, the strictest sanctions we've ever seen on an economy this size. Despite all of that, as long as he has revenue from oil and gas, which is going into Europe and into the United States, it's worth remembering the U.S. remains one of the biggest buyers of Russian oil. I think Russia's the third largest exporter of oil to the United States now. There's more oil coming from Russia than from Saudi Arabia. As long as that continues, he could survive for much longer than we would like.
Matt, and staying on the topic of sanctions, Shrub-Kempner in Galveston is asking if you think that ever-escalating sanctions can run the danger of cornering Putin with no acceptable off-ramp, perhaps leading to an even wider conflict.
Well, I think this is the fear that the sort of cornered rat theory that he could do something crazy here, and this is when you would wish for a kind of Stauffenberg like revolt, more successful than Stauffenberg, obviously. So yes, I mean that's clearly a danger here, and I think we've already seen the beginnings of that in some of the bombings on Kharkiv and Kiev in the past couple of days. This clearly wasn't part of their original game plan. They were sending conscripts down there with very little training who thought they were on some sort of exercises, or at least this is what they said when they were taken prisoner. And it seems that the plan was to just sort of show a kind of a bit of shock and awe, and everybody would start raising the white flag, and that hasn't happened. So the fact that he's already 7 days now, I believe, into the war, he's already bombing residential neighborhoods, certainly not a good sign. And it suggests that, he's willing to go much further. And all you need to do is look at Grozny or what he did in Syria to understand how far Russia is willing to go, or the Russian leadership is.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Janet Ellen in Atlanta, and I'll address this to you, Minister Sikorski. In your opinion, are there enough people in Putin's circle who could conclude that his actions are too destructive, that they could influence him to reverse course, or might they have the capability to do so themselves?
Well, if you watch that theatrical, Stalinesque Security Council that was recorded and shown on the telly, my impression was that only 3 or 4 people were fully on board with the program, and the rest looked more like hostages than enthusiastic supporters. In particular, the head of the external civilian intelligence, who must have known that Ukrainians would resist. There's nothing like success, but there's also nothing like failure to speed things up. These people, the army chiefs have clearly misled Putin. They've also organized this very badly. They might feel implicated, but they might also feel that maybe it's time to bring it to a close before it goes too far. We don't know is the answer. But palace coups have happened in the history of Russia on a number of occasions. And Putin is clearly alienated from the mood of the country, and is clearly operating by a different logic. But the trouble is that there is no procedure for removing him. In this sense, it's worse than under the Soviet Union. When they all got scared of Beria, they had a vote in the Politburo with literally generals outside the door who came in and arrested him. When Khrushchev overreached over Cuba, they had a vote in the Politburo and he retired. There is no vote. There is no body which can take a vote and remove Putin from power, because he is, in huge inverted commas, democratically elected president. So I'm afraid they would have to take more drastic action. And that, of course, is difficult, because some people would have to coordinate amongst themselves and would have to, put their lives on the line.
Our next question comes from Emily Mahler in Brussels. And Vlad, for you, after speaking with President Zelensky yesterday, who has asked Israel to try and mediate between Ukraine and Russia, Israeli Prime Minister Bennett called Vladimir Putin. It seems as though Putin has turned down all Israeli mediation requests dating back since well before the invasion. But what is the possibility of this mediation actually happening? So
actually, right as we're speaking, the second ceasefire negotiations are taking place in Gomel, in a border town in Belarus. The Russians made a concession that they went in to these negotiations without preconditions, and the Ukrainians made a concession that they actually went to Belarus, where the Belarusian army is fighting them. And at first they didn't even want to go because they thought that that the Belarus army would kill anyone who would go there. They had to be given all sorts of very serious assurances that they would not be shot, that the delegation would not be shot on site once they got there. The defense minister finally was talked into going. I mean, that's how bad things are. The defense minister didn't want to go to a ceasefire negotiation on pain of being shot. Ultimately, the Russians and the Ukrainians worked that through. They're actually having the second ceasefire negotiation right now. A lot of people, including myself, think that those ceasefire negotiations are just a ploy from the Russian side in order to prolong the fighting. They need to do something. They need some sort of quick victory. They need to amass chips that they can give away. They obviously are going to sue for peace under some scenario. There's nothing that they've achieved in terms of military objectives other than taking Bryansk and Kherson, and in 8 days with the military superiority that they have and the full air superiority that they have. If that's all they got done at the expense of the entire Russian economy and the entire moral and political legitimacy of the Russian Federation, that's not very much. So I don't see, again, I hope my relatives don't get bombed tomorrow or the day afterwards. I would pray that whatever's happening in Gomel right now leads to something, but I just don't see it, because why would Putin take all the losses now with all the costs that he's had to pay already locked in? We're not going to back down in the West just because he stops shooting now without some sort of concessions. And, you know, if the Ukrainians are willing to do something like, say, some sort of nonsense version of Finlandization, or even say, yes, we will denazify and we'll get rid of the Azov battalion or something, you know, something like that. There are certain things that they're willing to do. Maybe say, we're not going to, we promise not to try to resolve the Donetsk-Lugansk issue by force. If they want to come back to us, we'll accept them gladly, but we're not going to touch them again. There are things that the Ukrainians are willing to concede, but what the Russians are demanding as an a priori for an end of conflict is just ridiculous. And they're not going to put down their arms before they have a ceasefire. So I don't see it happening, but I hope it does. I really do.
Minister Sikorski, how is Poland handling the 400,000 plus Ukrainian refugees? And are other Western EU members willing to receive some of them?
I'll answer that question, but let me just talk about mediation. I think the only country that could successfully mediate because it has influence over Putin would be China. I'm told that the Russians withdrew their military forces in their recent foray into Kazakhstan under Chinese pressure. And without China, Russia would really be completely isolated. And therefore, the Chinese have some leverage of them. And for them, this cuts in all kinds of ways. They had a relationship with Ukraine. They probably have a deal with Putin that Putin will back their recovery of Taiwan in return. They probably are not too upset about Russia being isolated and falling into their lap as a vassal for free. But they also don't want to be blamed for this. And non-interference and sovereignty have been big for them. And if anybody could do it, maybe China could do it. Now, as regards Poland, even before the war, we had 1 million Ukrainians. And actually, interestingly, 80,000 of them, it's estimated, have downed their tools and gone to defend their country. So the 400,000 are mainly women and children. But there's also some movement the other way. And they are being received in Poland with unprecedented hospitality and generosity. I have friends who have received sometimes more than one Ukrainian family into their homes, which was, of course, much better than putting people in some camps or blocks of flats. And everybody knows that they're not going home anytime soon. But, you know, we were the same country for 400 years. The languages are similar. And the perception in Poland is the Ukrainians are fighting our fight, that if Putin is not stopped in Ukraine, he'll come for us. So you can expect Poland to be steadfast on this. What helps is also that they're Christian, Christian and Jewish, because quite frankly, in Poland, people are afraid of Muslim refugees for all kinds of historical reasons. They think that Muslim refugees don't integrate well, whereas in this case, this worry will not happen.
And I see we have Matt back. What do you think may be the most viable scenarios for a post-Putin Russia, if we're going to see one in the foreseeable future?
Well, if we see one in the foreseeable future, I think we need to be aware of the mistakes that we made in the 1990s when, we basically sent a bunch of carpetbaggers into the country to take advantage of all of the business opportunities there. And we didn't do enough to help the Russians build a viable democracy. We didn't do what happened in Germany in the 1950s. With all of the efforts that were made then, also through the Marshall Plan and other institutions that were set up at the time. And if it comes to that, I really hope that we learn our lesson and not let it fall back into the hands of these robber barons who have again led us to this juncture. And I hope also that Europe and the European Union, would play a central role in this. And, I think there also needs to be a reckoning, as I suggested before, especially in Germany, about the role that they have played in creating this crisis, looking the other way. I think people should not forget that the decision on Nord Stream 2 was made in 2015. The decision to build it finally was made in 2015. That was after Crimea. That was after the war had started in eastern Ukraine, and obviously after Georgia and everything that happened between 2007 and 2014. So, I think there's a lot to be learned from the past when it comes to this question.
Thank you so much. Simone, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you all really so much for your participation, for your thoughts, for your insights in this unprecedented time for the Ukrainian people, for the European Union, for the West at large. Having really sort of strong, courageous voices like yours, I think is of the utmost importance, and it proves just demonstrates how much interest there is and how people want to be able to help. So once again, thank you so much. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Slava Ukraina.
Ram Slava.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.